Trigger warnings. People have a love-hate relationship with trigger warnings. Some people say that it is spoiling the entire book, which I just frankly don't agree with. What if you're going you just or have went through something so traumatic and you're going to read about it and you wouldn't want to find okay, let's say you just went through something triggering or you find something triggering and you go to read this book and there's no trigger warning. So you just have to read that one part that you find triggering. If you had to choose to either not read it or read it because of that, you would choose not to read it. You get what I mean? I just don't think it's spoiling to tell you what. Let's just get into it because Reddit has. I'm gonna keep my thoughts and opinions until after this or in between, just because there's a lot to get through. I was going to find another video. I was through Reddit trying to find examples for another video, which is Book Talk's problem with spoilers, and then I found that people are actually more interested in trigger warnings or content warnings than spoilers. So let's do this one instead. My iPad died, so we relocated. This is actually where I filmed my first ever video. Right on this couch. And we have Tegan.
Hi everybody.
Okay, no more. If you want more, you're gonna have to pay for her only pause. So this Redditor, if you fancy using this word, we need trigger warnings on books. I don't see a lot, but I do agree. So let's read. Edit. I've seen a lot suggesting content warnings rather than trigger warnings, and I feel that captures my sentiment better than trigger warning. I believe content warnings are responsible ways for authors to inform readers about the content of a book. This doesn't only apply to triggers or trauma, but other things as well. So until literally 10 seconds ago, I thought content warnings and trigger warnings were the same thing, so I guess we're learning as we go. I haven't DNF'd a book for a while, but the Happy Ever After playlist broke my heart. My rule for DNF is typically 100 pages, and I made it to page 102 of this book. I personally didn't like reading about a guy pushing the boundaries of a woman when she's clearly setting them. I'll explain. I don't know why I didn't screenshot more, and I don't know where this Reddit page went, so sorry, you don't get to hear anything else. But, yes. Yeah. I don't have anything to say. A book is triggering to you, and that's why I think there should be trigger warnings. This is what I was saying in the intro. Let's say you are going through something traumatic, triggering. You're just now recovering for it. And you decide to pick up a new hobby for reading, or you have had the hobby of reading and you just decide to pick up a book. And that book happens to have mentions of this thing you're just recovering from. You don't get any warning of that. You're just diving into it. You're just basically forcefully reading this. And I just never thought of it like that. Here's next. Doesn't have a title. I'm a big fan of content warnings. I'm not really triggered by much, but I am someone who goes through phases of what I'm in the mood to consume. Content warnings are a lot easier than skimming 1-star reviews. I am happy that more and more authors are using them, but it seems like as they become more popular, we are also getting authors trying to be clever or jokey, and the result is I have no idea what the content warning is anymore. Case in point, I came across this content warning. This book series contains several queer and straight romances and a plethora of queer characters. Be advised that swords will cross in more ways than one. Huh? I have no idea what you were talking about. To me, it sounds like there are some menage scenes, and swords crossed is a reference to a male sexual content. Frick. Haley keeps texting. And said menage scenes? Bye, Tegan. But maybe the author just means that other characters are pairings. After all, this CW is for the series, and each book is a different couple, so maybe it's not what I think. So I go to the reviews and find a lot of comments along these lines. Not my cup of tea. I'm into romance books with steamy sex scenes, and this had none of that whatsoever. It was more a book about war and humans and elves fighting. If a book wasn't advertised as steamy, then why would you get it and then complain about not being steamy? I'm really not getting it. I don't know if it's phrased wrong or I'm just not understanding, but this does seem like it seems like a weird content warning. I think it's for the homophobes who don't support queer romances. I don't get why this... Okay, I think I just screenshotted random things. Let's just move on to the next one. I'm too confused. And it's almost 1 a.m. I don't have time for this. We're doing trigger warnings in books now. Twice in a couple days, I have come across a book with a trigger warning at the front. One was a book of poetry that had trigger warnings in its first page, saying there are discussions of abuse inside. What I'm saying, that's what trigger warning is. And if I was struggling with abuse, and I hold your hands very dearly if you are a victim of abuse, if I was going through abuse, I wouldn't want to read about it, and so that's why I would like... Actually, I don't know. So I'd never gone through abuse, so I can't really say what I would feel. But, okay, I think I'm just giving too many opinions. Ooh. I think I'm giving too many opinions when I haven't even read it yet, so let's go. But the worst was another book that had a reader advisory on the first page warning that this book includes mention of pandemics and infectious disease, as well as a website to go with the list of triggers in this book. But the fact that the author felt that historic pandemic in his novel necessitated a warning really made me roll my eyes. And of course, the book was dedicated to essential workers. Is this the world we want? If strong content is a concern, wouldn't a warning be on the cover be more sensible and sufficient? If I were someone who cared about these triggers, I might have already bought the thing before I found the warning. But are we so weak we need to be warned that this novel includes a pandemic? Do we really need or want trigger warnings at the front of books? That's what I'm saying. Like, what if I had epilepsy? There was no warning on the TV. This is why we need trigger warnings. I don't, maybe you do. This one really just like, this is why. Listen, what if my grandfather died while we were going through that pandemic, and just thinking of the pandemic just like triggers something in me? It's not weak. Being triggered by something is not weak. You could have had a traumatic experience there. You could have died. Like, I don't even think we're talking about COVID here, but COVID was a pandemic, so I'm going to use that for an example. What if someone you knew died in a pandemic or during COVID and you just feel triggered by that because you're very close, and this person on Reddit calls you weak? No, you're not weak. You have your triggers, and I'm just really getting worked up over this, and it's not in my favor. So, moral of the story for this one, you're not weak for thinking a pandemic is triggering. You don't even need to. It's just nice of the author to put that in his novel. He didn't have to, but he did, just to ensure the safety of his customers and readers. No, I think comfort is more of the word I was looking for rather than safety. But content warnings in books. I have found an increase in content warnings in books recently, and I wanted to know what everyone thought about these. I was reading a... Yeah, I'm making a YouTube video.
At this time of night, though?
Yeah, can you go back downstairs?
No.
Nana, I'm talking about trigger warnings in books.
Sugar.
Okay, so that was a little bit embarrassing. Why did my grandma walk up? And why I didn't hear her? She cannot hear me consoling you guys, telling you guys that you are not weak. No, she cannot. I was reading a book the other day and almost didn't want to read it when I saw the content warnings. That is why they're there. I fear that's why they're there. They're to tell you what's in the book, so It felt almost demeaning to me. I could see in perhaps a very specific genre such as hard horror, etc. But this was a pretty basic, pretty uneventful book. I made the decision then that I would not include these in my books, but talking to a few other people, they noted that it might be helpful for folks who don't want to experience certain triggers to read it. Folks, that is me. I think the role of writing is to help people expand their minds, and sometimes exposing yourself to triggers in the written word is part of that. However, I wanted to know what everyone thinks of this new trend. Edit, I guess I should have added a content warning to this post. Okay, so clearly the comments have more to say than the post. You think that people like reading the things that they're like that will trigger them will like help them? You think exposing themselves to the written word triggers in the written word will help? You think them reading their You think someone reading about their triggers will help them expand their minds? Sorry, you just really don't know what they've been through. So I fear if you have if you obviously don't know what triggers you have in your book, you don't have to add it. But if you know and you're fully well aware, then you can do whatever you want. Okay. Books need trigger warnings. I understand that triggers can be subjective and vary by people, but we all know general triggers from explicit content like SA, death, suicide, abuse, substance use, etc. that are commonly recognized, and books should be required to list these things as a warning of the content, like movies do. Additionally, if you're going to contain... Okay, I'm getting flashbacks from the first video. If you're going to contain explicit content, it is simple to include crisis numbers. If your book is about dying by suicide, how hard is it to include a little? If you have thoughts or feelings of hurting yourself, of others, call 988. Books should have some regulation when covering those types of topics. I don't want to read entire reviews that spoil a book just to get the idea of whether certain triggers may be included. Just my opinion. Okay, so I kind of agree with like half of that. I feel like you can add triggers like if like death by suicide. You just don't need to, in my opinion, you don't need to add a phone number. But that's really nice if you do. Also, I know I made it seem like I did. I just don't think that you need it's required to add a trigger warning. It helps, it really does. You don't need one. Why am I getting mixed opinions? This is like mood swings, okay? I would really like if someone had a content warning for people who get triggered by certain things. I just don't think that you should be required to. Here's a comment that was left in the screenshot. Trigger warnings often contain spoilers. Like if you know something is coming, you're just waiting to get to that part. But there are websites where you can look it up, and that's the way to do it, because that way when people want to know, they can look it up, and people that don't want to know don't have to. Okay, that one is kind of good. I kind of agree with that one. Yup, I agree. Next, because I don't even know what. Stop falling. Trigger warnings. I'm a little cautious to ask since it feels like I'm the outlier with this opinion, but what are your thoughts on listing trigger warnings for your books? A couple of book groups I'm in on Facebook have made me aware of the commonality of extensive descriptive trigger warnings for books that are self-described as dark or pitch black. I've read some of these trigger warning lists, and some even explain what happens in great detail behind the trigger warning. Example, for the trigger warning of rape, they explain which character gets raped and by whom, essentially giving away the plot and character story before the reader has a chance to read it. What? You don't need to add the character. Is that what people are raving about? I just, like, from the trigger warnings that I've read, I don't think they explain or tell what characters go through that. Honestly, they just, like to me, they just list it. They don't add, like, who. Maybe that's just me, though. Not all are this extreme. Most are simple, undescriptive warnings for domestic violence or language, etc. But I find that even these are little excessive and sharing too much of the book. Like, I was going to call it excessive. I just didn't want to hurt anyone's feelings or, like, be rude about it. Sorry. Also, if you're picking up a book that's considered pitch black or the, like, what did you expect? Right, though. Like, they're kind of right. I'll probably get grief from this, lol, but I worry that if I don't specifically list all the effed up things that are going to happen in my upcoming book, I'll be raked over the coals, thoughts, feelings. I do think that you should, like what they said, you should list all the messed up things that are in your book. I just think you don't need to add who goes through it and when. What it feels like to be triggered. I am of the strong opinion that in this day and age, there's no useful plot or character motivation for sexual assault. To me, it's a lazy shorthand for villainy and an unoriginal way of exploring body and autonomy, or lack thereof. But this post is not to argue that point. This post is to argue for the need of authors to include possible trigger warnings at the beginning of their books. I say need as opposed to wish or hope or another appropriate word because for the scope of this discussion, I am not speaking to personal reading preferences. There are times, for instance, when I don't want to read a lot of gore, but if I were to start a book and read the gore, I might think to myself, this is not a book I want to read right now. I would not be triggered in the way I'm going to describe below. I'm not going to single out authors or books because I believe it is never the author's intention to make a reader feel the way I will describe. The best way of avoiding this is to put a trigger or content warnings at the beginning of the book. Yup, case closed. Literally what I've been saying in my head. Like, that's what I wanted to say, but the words weren't coming out of my mouth. Trigger warnings. This post will go in depth into describing what it is like to be triggered. If you have triggers that description is likely to set you off again, please take care of yourself. See, my triggers are sexual abuse, including dubious consent and domestic violence. These are triggers for me because I've experienced them. I have traumatic memories I've worked very hard to leave in the past, and I turn to books and fantasy in particular to escape from them. See what I've been saying? Like, that's what I thought I was saying. I don't know if you guys really understood that's what I was saying, but I was saying that. Trust me. Hold my hands and trust me. So, yes, I think you should add a trigger warning for this exact reason. People who experienced that themselves. And sure, they might feel more connected to the character because they both went through something, but I feel like they'd be more triggered. Trigger warnings. Has anyone noticed authors using trigger warnings to clap back at negative reviews more than actually give accurate warnings? I'm currently reading a series and was shocked that the author's warning page on the second book was just chastising her audience about the reception of her previous books without disclosing that the MMC tampers with the FMC's birth control and gets her pregnant without consent.
Disgusting!
Let me read that again. Is that a trigger? No, that is not good. No, please don't do that. Have you ever seen those? I don't even know what they were. They were like stories, I guess, and they'd like it. It was like animated. They take pins and poke holes in the condom so she could get pregnant. Like, am I the only one that saw that? Like, I don't really know. Like, I haven't seen it in so long. It's the first time I thought about it in like forever. But like, what? Am I the only one? The third book's warning then criticizes her readers for being critical of the last book without any content warnings about the current novel. I then went back through some of my other recent Kindle Unlimited reads, only to find out that this is pretty common practice. I don't really get triggered by books, but I don't like out of nowhere surprises either, so I tend to rely on trigger warnings when choosing what to read. This is what I've been saying. Actually, I keep saying that. I don't really think I've been saying. I just really think that if you're gonna some people could get triggered by that. I believe that you should put a trigger warning. I don't really understand this one. Oh my gosh. The warning of the second book is just her talking about the reception of her other books. Her previous books, and she never talked about how the MMC tampers with the female main character's birth control and gets her pregnant without consent. She doesn't talk about this. She only talks about her other books. That's in the warning. And then the third book's warning criticizes her readers for being mad or like critical of the last book without any consent. So basically her warnings are just criticizing her readers and not talking about the warnings that contain in the books. Yes! See, this is why you have to read stuff a second time, and I'm going to keep that in mind for school coming up. In conclusion, my personal opinion, or what I think, is that you should put trigger warnings on your books, but you don't need to. Yes, that's the conclusion. Hope you guys liked this video. If you didn't, I'm sorry. Don't know what to do about that. If you did like it, I appreciate that very much. Love you guys. See you in the next one, I hope.